The Malthari high chamber pulsed with the dying light of their homeworld's twin suns. The air shimmered with ionized currents, casting auroras across the translucent crystal walls. Malvar stood rigid, his silver-carved armor reflecting the violet glow of the chamber's bioluminescent panels. His crest, a crown of delicate wind-swept filaments, lay flat against his skull in defeat. The verdict had been delivered. Across the flowing aerogel table, the last of the Galactic Accord's emissaries withdrew their holographic seals, their faces unreadable behind masks of shifting light. The message was clear in the silence. The Malthari would stand alone. No fleets would come, no shields would rise. The Devourers would consume their worlds, and the galaxy would watch. Malvar's claws flexed against the table's surface, leaving faint trails in the self-repairing alloy. He had argued, he had pleaded, but diplomacy, it seemed, was merely surrender by another name. Behind him, Thalolan's breath hitched, a sound like wind through fractured crystal. The scientist's slender fingers danced over a data slate, its surface alive with desperate calculations. There must be another way, he murmured, not to Malvar, but to the void itself. His voice was raw with the weight of 1,000 failed equations. Malvar did not answer. He had seen the projections. The Devourer's advance was a storm of teeth and shadow, swallowing star systems whole. The Accord strategy was cold logic: let the Malthari die and buy time to fortify the core worlds. A whisper of movement drew his gaze. Thalolan had activated the long-range array, its crystalline nodes humming with unstable energy. "What are you doing?" Malvar asked, though he already knew. Thalolan's eyes burned with something reckless, something human. "They listened once," he said. Malvar's spine stiffened. The ancient archive spoke of a species from the fringe, a young, howling thing that had answered a distress call when no one else would. Humans. They had fought like cornered beasts, then vanished into the dark, their warships bleeding but unbroken. Fools, the Accord had called them. Malvar exhaled, watching the transmission flare into the void, a scream wrapped in mathematics, a plea etched in light somewhere. In the endless night, a human warship stirred. Word count. Fey, section. Fey of Fey next section. The signal's journey Fey human fleet receives the transmission. Key elements established. Malthari's elegant, flowing tech versus the Devourer's existential threat. Thalolan's desperation mirroring human defiance. Malvar's internal conflict. Honor versus survival. Foreshadowing human intervention via historical precedent section. Fey. The human envoy, the transmission burned through the void like a dying star's last breath, mathematics and desperation woven into a single pulse of coherent light. It sliced through the silence between galaxies, a whisper in the dark where no one had ever answered before. But humanity had always listened for whispers. Aboard the UEF Vigilance, Outer Rim listening post-Sigma, Fey the signal hit the array like a thunderclap. Major Teyla Chen was halfway through her third cup of synthetic coffee when the alert flared across her retinal display. The liquid sloshed, forgotten, as the system's diagnostics blared in her skull. Unidentified FTL burst, origin Malthari sovereign colonies. Encryption pattern matches historical first contact protocols. Her fingers moved before her mind caught up. Neural interface flaring as she ripped the data stream open. What spilled across the holodisplay wasn't a distress call, it was a funeral dirge. The Malthari transmission unfolded in layers. Star maps, leading into tactical readouts, population metrics, collapsing into evacuation routes that terminated in dead ends. And beneath it all, the same looping refrain, Devourer fleet inbound, estimated fall of final stronghold, Fey cycles. No allied response. No hope remains. Chen's stomach turned to ice. She knew the Malthari. Not personally, no human had spoken to them in over a century, but the archives remembered. Delicate, crystalline beings who built cities that sang in the solar winds. The first species to offer humanity a place at the galactic table, back when Earth's warships still ran on fission and desperation. And now they were screaming into the dark. Chen's neural link pulsed as she routed the signal to command. The response was immediate. "You're sure it's them?" Admiral Kessler's voice was a blade of static in her auditory cortex. Chen didn't hesitate. "It's authentic, and it's a death warrant." A pause. Then, softer, "They helped us once." The words hung between them like a live wire. Malthari sovereign colony shall. Tanis Fey. Hours later, Malvar watched the sky. The Lowlands transmission had been a final act of defiance, a spark hurled into the abyss. The Accord had abandoned them, the Devourers would come, and yet a ripple in the solar winds. At first, he thought it a trick of the dying light. Then the defense grid shrieked to life, bioluminescent panels flaring violet as the sensors registered an inbound signature, not Devourer. The shape that tore into real space was angular where Malthari ships flowed, brutal where theirs sang. Its hull was a patchwork of armor plates and scorch marks, its drive signature roaring like a wounded beast. Malvar's spines locked. The archives had described their ships as crude things, barely spaceworthy. This monstrosity dwarfed the orbital platforms, its flanks bristling with weapons that glowed a sullen, radioactive red. A single shuttle detached, cutting through the atmosphere like a bullet. The Lowland stood frozen beside him. They came. Malvar could only watch as the human vessel settled on the landing spire, its thrusters scorching the elegant aerogel structures. The ramp lowered, and then she stepped out. Major Chen's combat armor was a relic of 100 battlefields, its once pristine plating scarred by particle burns and shrapnel. She moved like a blade unsheathed, every motion precise, lethal. Behind her, Sergeant Foster's rifle tracked the perimeter, his visor reflecting the Malthari's stunned faces. Chen's voice, when it came, was a rasp of gravel and gunpowder. "We got your message." Malvar felt something long buried stir in his chest. Word count. Fey section. Fey of Fey next section. The Malthari witness human war doctrine firsthand. Key elements established. Stark contrast between Malthari elegance and human brutality ships. Armor, demeanor, Chen's instant recognition of the Malthari's historical significance. Malvar's dawning realization that humanity's savagery might be their salvation. The unspoken debt. They helped us once. The Malthari command spire had been designed for contemplation. Its sweeping crystalline arches meant to channel the soft hum of atmospheric condensers, its translucent floors glowing with the pulse of their world's heartbeat. Now, it trembled under the weight of human boots. Major Teyla Chen did not walk so much as carve her way through the space, her armor's servos whining faintly with each step. The Malthari attendants flinched as she passed, their delicate silver fingers pausing over holographic displays. To them, she was a storm given form, a thing of jagged edges and scorched metal where they were flowing lines and whispered calculations. Malvar watched her from the central platform, his bioluminescent veins flickering with unease. He had seen warriors before, the Vrix with their chitinous brutality, the Keldar with their cold surgical strikes. But this was different. Chen stopped before the strategic holodisplay, her helmet tucked under one arm. The scars along her jaw caught the violet light, each one a story the Malthari couldn't begin to decipher. "Show me," she said. Thalolan, the lead scientist, hesitated, his tendrils, usually coiled in calm, twitched as he manipulated the projection. The star map unfolded, and with it, the truth. The Vrix Armada hung at the edge of Malthari space like a swarm of locusts, their ships blackened husks of organic metal, their energy signatures pulsing with a hunger that made the air taste of ozone. Numbers scrolled beside them, ship classes, weapon yields, projected invasion vectors. "They gave you an ultimatum," Chen observed. It wasn't a question. Malvar's throat tightened. 8 cycles to surrender our atmospheric processors, or they will burn our cities from orbit. A beat. Then Chen's lips curled, not a smile, but the baring of teeth. And your allies. Thalolan's voice was barely a whisper. They withdrew. The accord forbids interference in internal disputes. Chen's gaze didn't waver. So you called us. The words hung there, sharp as a knife between ribs. Malvar forced himself to meet her eyes. We had no other choice. For the first time, something flickered in Chen's expression. Not pity, but recognition. A memory surfacing. Thalolan didn't understand. But Malvar did. Centuries ago, when humanity had clawed its way from the ashes of their first interstellar war, it was the Malthari who had sent aid. Not soldiers, not weapons, just light. A single ship, slipping past blockades to deliver medical nanites to a dying colony. A debt unpaid. Chen turned back to the holodisplay. Your defenses? Thalolan gestured weakly. Shield projectors, a handful of aging patrol vessels. Sergeant Foster exhaled through his nose. Christ? Chen didn't react. Her fingers danced across the display, pulling up new data, human fleet positions, supply routes, jump calculations. The Malthari watched, stunned, as she began rearranging their entire strategy with the ease of a veteran adjusting rifle sights. You're planning to fight, Thalolan blurted. Chen didn't look up. No. Relief washed over the scientist until she continued. We're planning to win. The holodisplay shifted. Human warships blinked into existence along the projected Vrix advance, not in defensive formations, but in kill zones. Railgun platforms hidden in asteroid fields, mine clusters disguised as debris. And at the center of it all, the Indomitable, its hull bristling with enough firepower to crack a planet. Malvar's pulse stuttered. This wasn't defense. This was a trap. Chen finally straightened, her shadow stretching across the Malthari, like a blade across a throat. They think diplomacy means surrender. Her voice was quiet, deadly. Let's teach them what it really means. Outside, the first human dropships burned through the atmosphere, their engines screaming like wounded hawks. The war had come, and humanity had brought answers. Word count, Fey section, Fey of Fey. Next section, the Vrix learn why humans don't just fight wars. They end them. Key elements developed. The Malthari's desperation versus humanity's cold, calculated response. Chen's recognition of the old debt, humanity's long memory for both grudges and favors, the horror-fey gratitude of the Malthari, as they realize humans don't do last stands, they do annihilation, foreshadowing of the Indomitable's role as the hammer. To the Vrix anvil, the Malthari command spire trembled as the first orbital strikes hit the outer shields. Bioluminescent panels flickered, their aurora hues dimming under the strain. Malvar's claws dug into the crystalline console, his breath shallow. The Vrix had come in force, not to conquer, but to erase. Across the war table, Thalolan's silver crest pulsed with distress. His voice was barely audible over the distant thunder of atmospheric detonations. The last of the evacuation ships just went dark. The Vrix are targeting civilian clusters now. Malvar didn't answer. His gaze was locked on the holographic feed of the human fleet. Their fleet, holding position just beyond the debris field. The Indomitable loomed among them, its angular silhouette a jagged scar against the stars. It hadn't moved, hadn't fired. Thalolan followed his stare. There, waiting for something, aboard the Indomitable, Major Teyla Chen stood motionless in the tactical nexus. The chamber hummed with suppressed energy, the walls lined with flickering data streams that cast her face in shifting violet shadows. The Malthari's distress signal still echoed in her skull. Not a plea for aid, but a final transmission. A species accepting extinction. Sergeant Foster shifted beside her, his armor's power cells cycling with a low predatory whine. Orders, Major? Chen exhaled. Humanity had protocols for this. The Vrix armada descended like a swarm of winged locusts, their ships sleek and venomous, their weapons carving through the Malthari's last defenses with surgical precision. They had studied the species for decades, knew their tactics, their limits, knew they would break. Then the Indomitable's engines ignited. Not the slow, ponderous burn of a warship maneuvering. A detonation of thrust, raw and violent, the vessel tearing through space like a bullet through flesh. Malvar's breath caught. This was the human response, not a declaration, not a warning. Just motion, just action. The Vrix didn't even have time to reorient. The Indomitable didn't engage. It plowed through the lead Vrix cruiser at Faye, its reinforced prow shearing the alien vessel in half, with a soundless scream of ruptured metal. Debris scattered, glowing white, hot from the impact, and still the human ship didn't stop. Foster's voice crackled over the comms, eerily calm. Targets acquired, executing silent protocol. The Malthari sensors screamed as the Indomitable's weapons array activated, not in bursts, not in volleys, but in a single synchronized unleashing. Railgun slugs punched through Vrix shields like they weren't there. Each impact precise, each trajectory calculated to maximize carnage. Plasma lances licked out, not to disable, but to disintegrate, carving glowing scars across the enemy formation. The missiles, not the crude explosives, the Vrix had expected. Not even the Malthari's elegant energy warheads. Humanity's answer was simpler. Nanite swarms erupted from the warheads, a glittering black tide that clung to Vrix hulls, dissolving them molecule by molecule. Ships that had weathered entire battles melted in seconds, their crews choking on air suddenly thick with the scent of ionized metal and burning flesh. Malvar watched, his throat tight. This wasn't war. This was erasure. Chen finally moved, stepping forward into the holographic carnage. The Malthari's stunned silence bled through the comms, their disbelief almost palpable. She didn't smile. They thought diplomacy meant surrender. Outside, the last Vrix ship crumpled like paper in a fist. Now they know. Word count. Faye, section. Faye of Faye. Next section. The Malthari witness, the aftermath, and the cost of humanity's mercy. Key elements developed. The horror fae-awe of the Malthari as they realize humans don't fight wars. They delete them, Chen's chilling calm, contrasting with the visceral brutality of the Indomitable's assault, the Vrix fatal miscalculation. They expected a battle, not annihilation, foreshadowing the true scale of human protocols. This was just one ship section, Faye. Aftermath. The silence was worse than the screaming. Malvar's claws scraped against the crystalline console as the last Vrix signatures winked out of existence across the tactical display. The Indomitable hung in the void like a specter, its matte black hull still humming with residual energy. No triumphant broadcast, no gloating transmission, just the quiet, terrible certainty that every single Vrix vessel, every life aboard them, had been reduced to atoms in less time than it took a Malthari to recite the oaths of unity. Behind him, the lowland's bioluminescent markings flickered erratically, his respiratory vents flaring as he processed the data streams. The numbers made no sense. The humans hadn't just won. They had rewritten the parameters of victory. The lowland's voice was barely a whisper. They didn't even use their primary weapons. Malvar didn't answer. His gaze was locked on the wreckage, or rather, the lack of it. The Vrix hadn't left debris. They hadn't left anything, just expanding clouds of superheated plasma where their ships had been, already cooling into cosmic background radiation. A human would have called it clean. The Malthari had no word for it. On the Indomitable, Major Teyla Chen exhaled slowly, her fingers resting lightly on the armrest of her command throne. The bridge crew worked in efficient silence, their movements precise, their voices low. No cheers, no celebration, just the quiet hum of systems cycling down from combat readiness. Sergeant Foster's knuckles were white around his rifle. He had seen the feeds, the way the Vrix ships had disintegrated under the Indomitable's barrage. the way their shields had crumpled like foil under a gravity hammer. He had expected satisfaction, vindication. Instead, all he felt was the weight of the thing they had just unleashed. Chen's voice cut through his thoughts, calm as a surgeon's scalpel. Status: all hostiles neutralized, the tactical officer reported. No secondary contacts. Malthari fleet is holding position. No active targeting. A pause. Then, softer. They're scared, Mom. Chen didn't react. She didn't need to. The Malthari had watched the Vrix die. Now they understood. The Lowland's claws trembled as he reviewed the sensor logs. The humans hadn't just outgunned the Vrix. They had outthought them. Every Vrix maneuver had been anticipated. Every countermeasure rendered useless before it could be deployed. The Indomitable hadn't fought a battle. It had executed a predetermined conclusion. Malvar finally turned from the view screen, his crest spines flattened in submission. "We thought they were reckless," he murmured. "We were wrong." Thalolan's voice was hollow. They weren't reckless. They were waiting. The realization settled over them like a shroud. The humans had known. They had always known. And they had let the galaxy believe they were weak, right up until the moment they chose not to be. Outside, the last traces of the Vrix fleet faded into the void. The Indomitable remained. Word count. Fey section. Fey of Fey next section. The Malthari request a meeting and learn the true meaning of negotiation. Key elements developed. The chilling efficiency of human warfare. No wasted motion. No excess destruction. Just execution. The Malthari's dawning horror as they realize humanity let the galaxy underestimate them. Foster's quiet unease. The cost of being the ones who wield this kind of power. Chen's terrifying calm. She isn't celebrating, because to her, this wasn't a victory. It was a demonstration. The Malthari command. Spire hummed with the quiet resonance of dying energy. The air tasted of ionized metal, sharp and metallic, the aftermath of too many systems pushed beyond their limits. Malvar stood at the observation platform. His four-fingered hands pressed against the translucent crystal surface. Below him, the wreckage of the Vrix armada still glowed, twisted husks of warships. Their once proud hulls, now little more than shattered ribs in the void. And in the center of it all, the Indomitable. It hadn't moved. That was the most unnerving part. The humans had annihilated an entire fleet, one that had brought the Malthari to their knees, and then simply stopped. No triumphant broadcast, no demands, just the silent, looming presence of a warship that had, in the span of minutes, rewritten the balance of power in the galaxy. Thalolan's voice was a whisper behind him. "They're waiting for us to speak first." Malvar's crest of sensory tendrils flickered, a subconscious ripple of unease. He had spent cycles studying human psychology, their history of war and diplomacy. He had thought he understood them. He had been wrong. The humans had not acted out of desperation. They had not struck in blind fury. Every move had been calculated, the precision of their assault, the way they had dismantled the Vrix without wasting a single shot. It spoke of a military doctrine refined over centuries of conflict. And now they waited, because they knew the Malthari had no choice. Malvar exhaled, his breath fogging the crystalline panel before him. The decision was already made. The Malthari had no fleet left, no allies, no bargaining power, only survival. He turned to Thalolan. "Open a channel." The human commander's face filled the holodisplay. Major Teyla Chen was not what Malvar had expected. Her features were calm, almost serene, but her eyes, dark, unreadable, carried the weight of something ancient, something hungry. She did not smile. She did not gloat. She simply watched. Malvar forced his voice steady. "You have our gratitude." A pause. Then, Chen tilted her head slightly, as if considering the words. "Gratitude isn't what you called for." The truth of it settled between them. The Malthari had not begged for rescue. They had screamed into the void for anyone who would listen. And humanity had answered. Not as saviors, not as allies, but as something far more dangerous. "What do you want?" Malthari asked. The question blunt, stripped of diplomacy. Chen's lips thinned, not quite a smile, but something sharper. A conversation. Behind her, the bridge of the Indomitable was a study in controlled chaos. Human officers moved with quiet efficiency, their hands dancing across holographic interfaces, their voices low and clipped. None of them looked at the screen. None of them seemed to care that they were being observed. It was the indifference that chilled Malthari the most. These were not warriors drunk on victory. They were soldiers who had done their job, and now they were waiting for the next order. Chen leaned forward slightly. "You thought we were weak." It wasn't an accusation, just a fact. Malthari didn't deny it. "You let the galaxy believe it," he said instead. Chen's gaze didn't waver. "We let the galaxy see what it wanted to see." A beat of silence. "Now you see us." The words hung in the air, heavier than the wreckage outside. Malthari understood. This wasn't a negotiation. It was a reckoning. Sergeant Ryan Foster stood at the edge of the observation deck, his fingers tapping an absent rhythm against his thigh. The Malthari spire stretched below him, its flowing organic architecture glowing faintly in the dim light. It was beautiful, in a way, like something carved by wind and time. He wondered how much of it would be left when this was over. Foster wasn't a diplomat. He wasn't even an officer. He was just a soldier who had seen too many wars to believe in clean endings. The Malthari had called for help. Humanity had answered. But help wasn't free, and Foster knew, better than most, that the galaxy was about to learn what happened when you underestimated humans. Not because they were cruel, but because they remembered, and they planned. He exhaled, watching his breath mist in the cold air. Somewhere below, the negotiations were beginning, somewhere beyond. The rest of the galaxy was still sleeping. They wouldn't be for long. Word count, Fey section, Fey of Fey next section. The terms are set, and the Malthari realized too late what alliance truly means. Key elements developed, the Malthari's dawning understanding of human patience, and the horror of realizing they were allowed to underestimate humanity. Chen's terrifying calm, the quiet authority of someone who has already won and is merely waiting for the rest of the galaxy to catch up. Foster's unease, the cost of being the ones who hold the knife, even when it's necessary, the unspoken threat in humanity's silence. This was never about saving you. This was about making sure the rest of the galaxy never forgets what happens when you cross us. The Malthari delegation stood in the crystalline chamber, their bioluminescent markings pulsing in uneasy rhythms. The air hummed with the low thrum of their organic technology, streams of purple, white energy flowing through translucent conduits, like veins of living light. Kess, their lead negotiator, had spent cycles studying human behavior. Their erratic wars, their reckless expansion, their refusal to submit to the galactic order. He had dismissed them as impulsive, emotional creatures, too fractured to ever be a true threat. Now, standing before Major Teyla Chen, he realized his mistake. She was not what he expected. Human diplomats were supposed to be desperate, pleading, grateful for the scraps of recognition the Malthari deigned to offer. Instead, Chen stood with the stillness of a predator who had already decided the hunt was over. Her uniform was unadorned, her posture relaxed, but her eyes, those were the eyes of something that had survived extinction and learned to thrive in its shadow. Kess' secondary eyelids flickered. The terms had been laid out. Humanity would defend the Malthari against the encroaching Gulthar armada. In exchange, the Malthari would grant them full access to their archives. Every secret, every lost technology, every piece of knowledge their civilization had hoarded for millennia. A fair trade, Chen had called it. Kess had almost laughed. The Gulthar were unstoppable. Their fleets darkened stars, their weapons shattered worlds, No species had ever stood against them and survived. Chen had not flinched, not when Kess listed the Gulthur's victories, not when he described the fate of the last species who had dared resist. She had simply listened, her expression unreadable, and then said, in that quiet, measured voice, "Well, handle it," as if it were nothing, as if the annihilation of entire civilizations was a problem humanity had already solved. Kess' pulse quickened, his crystalline skin flushing pale violet with unease. He had assumed this was desperation, a dying species clinging to the Malthari's coattails for survival. But now, watching Chen, he wondered, had they chosen this moment? Had they waited for it? A soft chime echoed through the chamber as the Malthari's central datasphere completed its analysis of the human fleet's capabilities. The holographic display shimmered into existence between them, and Kess' breath caught. The ships were wrong, not in design, though their angular brutalist frames clashed violently with the Malthari's flowing organic aesthetics. But in intent, these were not vessels built for war. They were vessels built for annihilation. Kess' claws flexed involuntarily as the scan data scrolled past. Reinforced adamantium, titanium alloy hulls, layered with energy dispersive plating, spinal, mounted railguns capable of accelerating projectiles to near relativistic speeds, secondary batteries loaded with singularity warheads, weapons that didn't just destroy, but unmade matter at the quantum level. And then there were the fighters, not drones, not automated kill swarms, piloted craft. Humans strapped themselves into those machines, hurled themselves into the void, knowing full well they might not return, and did it anyway. Kess' mind reeled. No civilized species would accept such losses. No rational commander would throw away lives like that, unless they weren't throwing them away, unless they knew they would win. His gaze snapped back to Chen. She was watching him, not the datasphere, not the terms, him. And in that moment, Kess understood. This was not an alliance. This was not even a negotiation. This was a demonstration. Humanity had not come to save the Malthari. They had come to send a message, and the galaxy would hear it. Section Fe. The diplomacy of steel. The Malthari command spire trembled as another distant impact shook the orbital grid. Malvar's crystalline fingers hovered over the tactical display, watching the last of their defense platforms flare and die under the enemy's relentless assault. The air smelled of ionized ozone and something darker, burning aerogel, the scent of a civilization crumbling. Across the chamber, the lowland's bioluminescent markings pulsed erratically, her tendrils coiled tight with stress. The scientist had spent cycles studying the invaders, their tactics, their contempt for surrender. Now she whispered what they all knew. They will not stop until the skies are empty of us. Malvar's secondary eyelids flicked shut for a heartbeat. The enemy had declared this a cleansing, a necessary pruning, and the rest of the galaxy had turned its back, unwilling to risk their own fleets for a species that had never raised a weapon in anger. Until they answered, until the humans came. The holodisplay flickered, resolving into the image of Major Teyla Chen. She stood on the bridge of her warship, the Vigilance, its bulkheads lined with the scars of 100 battles. Behind her, crew moved with a precision that bordered on ritual, humans slotting fresh munitions into railgun batteries, others monitoring the eerie glow of singularity containment fields. Chen didn't speak. She didn't need to. The display split, showing the enemy armada, a swarm of sleek predatory vessels, their hulls shimmering with adaptive camouflage. They outnumbered the human task force 5-1. The first volley came, not from the humans, but from the enemy, a storm of plasma lances, the kind that had carved through Malthari shields like vapor. The Vigilance didn't evade. It turned, presenting its broadside, and Malvar's breath caught as he saw why. The impacts splashed, where Malthari defenses shattered. Human armor held, the outer layers boiling away in sacrificial strata, dissipating the energy across fractal heat sinks. The hull beneath was already regenerating, nanite swarms knitting the wounds, shut like clotting blood. Then the humans returned fire. Railgun rounds crossed the distance in a blink, their hypersonic passage igniting the thin exoatmosphere into brief, violent suns. Enemy ships folded, their elegant forms crumpling under kinetic fury. Secondary explosions rippled through their formations as singularity warheads detonated, not with fire, but with a terrible soundless unmaking, spheres of reality itself collapsing into hungry voids. Thololan made a sound like breaking glass. They're not just fighting, they're dismantling them. And then the fighters launched, not drones, not expendable machines. Malvar watched, transfixed, as the tiny craft streaked into the fray. They moved with a recklessness that bordered on insanity, jinking through plasma fire, rolling into attack vectors that defied logic. One took a direct hit, its wing shearing away in a gout of molten debris. The pilot didn't eject. They rammed. The enemy cruiser's shield flared once, then failed as the crippled fighter plowed into its bridge. At Facey, the explosion bloomed silent and bright, a funeral pyre for both hunter and prey. Chen's voice cut through the silence, calm as deep ice. You asked why we came. On the display, the Vigilance's main battery charged, a spinal, mounted monstrosity that hummed with the promise of annihilation. This is why. The weapon fired. A beam of coherent gravity, a spear of fractured physics, lanced across the void. It didn't pierce the enemy flagship, it unwound it. The vessel came apart in slow, surreal ribbons, its structure peeling away layer by layer like an onion skin, until nothing remained but glittering dust. Malvar realized, then, what this was: not a rescue, not even a battle. A statement. The galaxy had abandoned the Malthari, humanity had not, and now everyone would remember the price of that choice. The void between stars had never felt so heavy. Malvar watched the debris field drift, twisted spars of Malthari alloy, still glowing from plasma burns, the shattered remains of their wood. The executioners floating in lazy, expanding arcs. The Vigilance loomed among the wreckage, its angular hull, a brutal contrast to the Malthara's flowing organic forms. It was a knife in the dark, still humming with the aftershocks of its gravity weapon. He should have felt relief. Instead, his veins ran cold. The humans had not come with mercy in their hearts. They had come with fire. Thololan's voice was barely a whisper, her bioluminescent markings flickering with exhaustion. They could have disabled the flagship, taken prisoners. They chose annihilation. Malvar didn't answer. His eyes traced the scars on the human warship's hull, pitted armor, blackened from re-entry burns, the jagged remnants of a dozen past battles. This was not a vessel built for peace. It was a beast that had tasted blood too many times to ever forget the flavor. On the Vigilance, Major Teyla Chen exhaled slowly, her fingers resting on the tactical display. The Malthari distress signal still played in the background, a looping cry for help that had crossed light, years to reach human ears. Sergeant Foster stood beside her, his jaw tight. They're hailing us. She knew what he wasn't saying. The Malthari were afraid, not of their attackers, but of them. Chen had seen that fear before. On Proxima, on Eridani, every time humanity stepped onto the galactic stage, someone flinched. She activated the comb. The Malthari bridge was silent as the human commander's face filled their view screen. Her dark eyes were steady, her voice calm, but Malvar saw the weight behind them, the kind of weariness that came from too many battles, too many losses. High Commander Malvar, she said, your people are safe. A simple statement, a lie by omission, safe from the enemy. But what about from them? Thololan's fingers trembled as she accessed the sensor logs. The human weapon's discharge had left an imprint on local space-time, a lingering distortion, like a wound in reality itself. That weapon, she breathed. It wasn't designed for ships. Malvar understood. The humans had brought a blade meant for gods, and they had wielded it without hesitation. Foster watched the Malthari's reaction through the feed, his gut twisting. Had seen that look before, the dawning horror, the realization that humanity's help came with teeth. They think we're monsters, he muttered. Chen didn't flinch. Let them. She had made her choice years ago, standing in the ruins of New Oslo, watching the sky burn. The galaxy had rules, laws, diplomacy. But when the strong preyed on the weak, when the civilized turned away, humanity remembered, and they answered. Malvar finally found his voice. Why? The human commander didn't smile, didn't soften, because no one came for us. The words hung in the air, heavier than the corpses drifting outside. The Malthari had been abandoned, so had humanity. The difference. Humans had clawed their way back up, scarred, furious, and armed. And now, they had passed that same lesson to the galaxy. Malvar looked at the wreckage again, at the human ship, silent and unrepentant. For the first time in centuries, he felt something kindle in his chest. Not gratitude, recognition. The scars they bore were not marks of shame. They were a warning. And the galaxy had just been reminded. The silence in the Malthari command spire stretched like the void between stars. Malvar stood at the crystalline viewport, his reflection fractured across its iridescent surface. Behind him, the remnants of his fleet drifted, twisted wrecks of flowing silver alloy, their bioluminescent panels flickering like dying stars. The human warship loomed among them, its brutal angularity a jagged scar against the Malthari's elegant, wind-carved aesthetics. It shouldn't have survived. It hadn't survived, not by any metric the Malthari understood. Scans showed ruptured reactors, shattered armor, entire decks exposed to vacuum. Yet it still moved, still fought, its weapons systems somehow operational even as its hull bled atmosphere in frozen ribbons. Thalolan's voice was hushed, his crest, spines trembling. Their damage control protocols, they're not just repairs, they're sacrifices. Malvar watched as another section of the human ship detonated, a deliberate explosion, funneling debris into the path of a Malthari torpedo swarm. The humans burned their own ship to survive. A warning chime sounded. The human commander's face flickered onto the hollow display, her features gaunt under the red emergency lighting of her bridge. Blood streaked her temple, her uniform torn at the shoulder, where a makeshift bandage barely staunched the wound. Malvar. No title, no deference, just a name spoken like a blade being drawn. He inclined his head. Commander Chen. She didn't waste words. Your allies are gone. Your fleet's in pieces. You've got two choices. A pause, deliberate, surrender, or burn. Thalolan flinched, Malvar didn't. He had seen the data. The human ship's reactors were critical. Its ammunition reserves nearly depleted. They were as crippled as his own forces. But then Chen's lips curled, not a smile, but something darker. You're wondering if we're bluffing. A transmission feed snapped open beside her, a view of the human vessel's engineering bay. Malvar's breath caught. Humans, dozens of them, were manually rerouting power conduits, their hands blistering against superheated metal. One collapsed, convulsing from radiation exposure. Another dragged him aside and took his place without hesitation. Chen's voice was iron. We don't need reactors. Well, jury, rig batteries. We don't need ammunition. Well, throw the goddamn chairs if we have to. The feed cut. Malvar exhaled. He had commanded fleets for a century. He had studied war across 1,000 species. None fought like this. None could, Thalolan whispered. They'll die before they stop. Malvar knew the truth. Then, the humans weren't offering surrender. They were offering mercy. And if he refused, they would make their point again and again until nothing remained but the lesson. He activated the calm. Stand down. Across the fleet. Malthari ships powered down their weapons. The human vessel didn't. Chen watched him, unblinking. Malvar bowed his head, not in submission, in recognition. "We accept your terms." A pause. Then Chen gave a single, sharp nod. The human ship's guns finally dimmed. Later, in the ruins of the Malthari spire, Sergeant Foster knelt beside a wounded alien soldier, pressing a coagulant patch to its leaking carapace. The Malthari trembled, its violet eyes wide with confusion. Foster didn't speak, didn't need to. The galaxy had rules, laws, diplomacy. But when the killing stopped, humans helped. Malvar watched from the shadows, something unnameable tightening in his chest. The scars they bore were not just a warning, they were a covenant. And for the first time in centuries, the Malthari understood. Section Aftermath. The silence that settled over the ruined spire was not the quiet of defeat, nor the hush of surrender. It was something else entirely, something the Malthari had no word for. Malvar stood at the edge of the shattered observation platform, his carapace still humming with the residual charge of battle. Below, the humans moved through the wreckage with methodical precision. They did not loot, they did not gloat. They repaired. A human engineer, smaller than the others, her armor scorched and cracked, knelt beside a fractured power conduit, her hands moving with a speed that bordered on instinct. She didn't hesitate, didn't consult schematics. She simply knew how the Malthari systems worked, as if she had studied them for years. Malvar's secondary eyes flickered in disbelief. Impossible. Yet there she was, rerouting energy flows with a familiarity that bordered on intimacy. Beside her, another human dragged a broken section of crystalline plating aside, revealing a wounded Malthari technician trapped beneath. The human didn't pause, didn't weigh the risk. He simply lifted, his muscles straining against the weight, his breath hissing through clenched teeth. The technician stared up at him, mandibles slack. The human grinned, a baring of teeth that should have been a threat. Instead, it was a promise. Malvar's pulse thrummed in his secondary veins. This was not the behavior of conquerors. This was not the aftermath of war as the Malthari understood it. This was something worse. This was forgiveness. Across the spire, the humans worked with the same terrifying efficiency they had wielded in battle. They stabilized the wounded Malthari and human alike. They restored power to critical systems. They even salvaged fragments of shattered art, carefully stacking the broken mosaics as if they held value beyond function, as if they mattered. Malvar turned his gaze to the sky, where the human warship loomed like a dormant storm. Its guns were cold now, its hull scarred but unbroken. A reminder, a hand touched his forearm. He flinched, his spines rising reflexively before he recognized the human standing beside him. The human commander said nothing, didn't need to. His eyes, dark, unreadable, held the weight of 1,000 unspoken truths. Malvar exhaled, the tension in his carapace easing by degrees. The galaxy had changed today, and for the first time in his long, merciless life, Malvar was afraid of what came next, not of war, but of peace.